do is share a little bit of pertinent information with you. And he said, I'm not interested. And I said, even if it leads to the truth? And that was basically it. I got the sign off, very polite. Well, I'm kind of busy.
And you said even if it leads to the truth, and he still was of the mindset he didn't care.
He didn't want to be influenced, even by the truth, I guess.
Even by the truth.
Yeah.
Certainly didn't want to be influenced by the truth, no.
Exactly. So
a lie, maybe, but not the truth. All right, go ahead.
Yes. Now, I had spoken to him while he was in New York, and he had a team there in Hawaii trying to get the records. Now, this story about Madeline Dunham started surfacing shortly after that, a few weeks after that.
Let me stop you now. All right, Madeline Dunham is Stanley Ann Dunham's mother, who is Barack Obama's grandmother, which is the lady that's in Hawaii that mysteriously died the day before the election, right?
Yes.
Okay,
now,
go ahead.
So they say. Now, keep in mind, I had already written about and determined that the father, Stanley Armour, the career furniture salesman, had been turned into a CIA spook.
Okay.
And so had Stanley Ann. When you have Barack saying she died of ovarian cancer, and you have a so-called grandmother who was from Kenya, living in London, telling the Mail Online that she was very close, and when Stanley Ann died of breast cancer, and that stuck out like a sore thumb. I said, wait a minute. There's at least 12 inches between the ovaries and the breasts on such a small woman. How could they have it so wrong? How could everybody be so wrong? And I'm not trying to be graphic. I'm pointing out that she specifically said breast cancer. Barack specifically said ovarian cancer. And my research showed me that there were hundreds of aliases for Stanley Ann Dunham, that she was alive, that she had progressed in age in people search engines, and she was into real estate money laundering. And then I began uncovering Barack's aliases. Now, one could say, well, that's a stretch. You don't really know that they were his aliases. Well, I can tie them directly to Madeline Dunham, who was the escrow officer for the Bank of Hawaii, and she was also in the mortgage loan department, which is...
This is the grandmother.
This is the grandmother for the Bank of Hawaii. Now, she was one of two vice presidents. Now, it's going to sound like I'm going to digress, but when Barack came back from where they say he was in Indonesia to study at the Punahou School, which cost $12,000 a year at that time, who would have paid for that? Well, certainly the money could have been set up into an account through Madeline's position at the bank. Someone outside, let's say, not necessarily a George Soros or likely Rockefeller. My intuition told me Rockefeller was funding this. Any of the Rockefellers, it didn't matter who. Stanley Ann was working for the Ford Foundation and for the Rockefellers, as was the mother, as was the father. They were all involved. The grandparents in Oklahoma, where they said they were from Kansas, they were really in Oklahoma. Barack Obama's so-called great-grandfather had a Social Security number issued in Oklahoma. And I found him on shipping lists, on passenger lists, on the cruise list of ships that were traveling all over the world doing business for Rockefeller. So this story about Kansas was a story. The story about Seattle was a story, and Mercer Island. The story about Hawaii and his birth there, it was all a fiction. And I was absolutely convinced of it because it's a simple thing. You're born there, get your birth certificate, and show it to everybody. If it's real, there's no problem. But no, we've got forged documents there, and then we have this secret history now with Frank Marshall Davis. He's a mentor to Barack Obama, teaching him about the evils of the white man and how communism is going to take over the world. And this guy is writing books, and he wrote a book called Sex Rebel, and he mentions a fling with a couple from Seattle, and their names are Dot and Lloyd. And I thought, Dot and Lloyd, those names are going to come to me. I'm going to find out who Dot and Lloyd are. I didn't read the book. I just went by that description. Of course, he talks about that description in his book. Well, it turns out that the other female bank vice president at the Bank of Hawaii was a lady by the name of Dorothy Yamamoto. Dorothy is the full name, Dot is the nickname for Dorothy. Well, that would be a stretch for me to say that Dorothy Yamamoto and Dot were the same person, unless I could find a Dorothy and Lloyd Yamamoto. I did. I found them actually having been born in Michigan, according to documents, graduating from South High School in Cleveland in 1936, majoring in, guess what, chemistry. Now I have two chemists. I have my informant, and now I have Lloyd Yamamoto. And just as a caveat, Lloyd Yamamoto's father was a geneticist. Oh my goodness, a geneticist. Sound familiar? I think I used that phrase in my article. We hear about the Nazi plans of creating hybrid human beings and cloning and every sadistic experiment that Joseph Mengele could think up, studying twins and torturing people and trying to create a perfect human being. It made all the sense in the world that these people were CIA contacts and they were working at the bank, and there was a connection between Lloyd Yamamoto and Stanley Armour Dunham, who had a connection with the guy in the photo, Charles Raschke, the chemist for Wilson and Company Foods, and then later Safeway Foods, guess where? In California. So they followed suit. When Raschke went to Denison, Texas, the Dunhams followed. That's why they were shown in Texas. When he went to Oakland, California, they followed. That's why Madeline Dunham's name shows up at Berkeley University in California. So I'm finding out more things about the family than what the general literature is disclosing. And I hear that music.
Yeah, you hear the music. Okay, I'll tell you what, folks, second hour coming up, much more to come here. Boy, this is better than a spy novel, isn't it? And here we're talking about the next, well, the inaugural president of the United States going to be sworn in next month. Be back in 3. Michael Herzog, The American Awakening, with my special guest, Don Nicoloff. Second hour coming up. Stick around. You don't want to miss it.
Hi, neighbor. This is Steve Shank, Fearless Task Force. Life is a gamble, but you can stack the deck. If you knew what I know about all the problems food will protect you from, you'd start immediately to put every effort and dollar you can get into the biggest supply of food possible. When the dollar and economy crash, when the imported and genetically poisoned food is all that's left, when the quarantine and bird flu hit, our only protection and only chance to be fearless is having control of our own supply of food and enough of it. But if you knew what we haven't yet discovered, you wouldn't waste time listening to the rest of this announcement before charging out and getting a serious food supply. Decide, it's food now or probably never. But can you afford to be wrong? Decide now. Place your bet. Can you afford to be wrong? Call 800-409-5633 on the web efoodsdirect.com. Call 800-409-5633.
Lee Rogers here. The global controllers are continuing their quest to enslave humanity and form their new world order. The one thing standing in their way are free thinkers who reject collectivism and support individual liberty. In these troubled times, it is imperative that we the people are not destroyed for our lack of knowledge, but are instead empowered with information. RogueGovernment.com and BlacklistNews.com are two of the best sources of alternative news and information on the Internet. Whether it's geopolitics, globalism, government corruption, the unraveling global economy, staged elections, false flag terrorism, the technological control grid, martial law, the police state, or issues of real significance, you'll find them on these websites. RogueGovernment.com and BlacklistNews.com feature raw, fully sourced information with no intrusive advertisements. Be sure to visit these sites and empower yourself with the news and information the corporate-controlled mockingbirds don't want you to know about.
History will always remember those with the strongest voice. You're listening to the Oracle Broadcasting Network. Long live the revolution.